What's up, gangsters? How about another Spitfire episode? And with this one, this is going to be all about getting into the first stages of what some people might call the actual weathering. So, let's do some stains and some streaks. Okay, so that last episode, like I said, was all about washes. But, of course, I forgot one. And that is the washes that I need here inside the wheel wells and on the gear legs, which I already have painted. So I'm going to do that, but I wanted to use this opportunity to use a different type of wash and explain that to you guys. So I think I mentioned when I was doing the cockpit section that one option for washes are acrylic washes, and that some people even make their own. And there is this version of that some people like to call the magic wash. And what it is basically a blend of a clear acrylic varnish, and aqua gloss is excellent for it because it's thin, it's ready right out of the bottle, and that's the main thing, is it needs to be super thin. Some people talk about using Future, but personally I'm not going to trust Future anywhere on something I care about, so I use aqua gloss. But it's a blend of aqua gloss, water, a little bit of flow aid, and some people use acrylic paint. I use ink. And it works wonderfully. It's got some qualities about it that an oil wash or an enamel wash just doesn't have. And I'm going to show you that. So what I've got here is I've already got some mixed up a little bit. Right here is just the base. And that's just half aqua gloss, half water, and 3 or 4 drops of flow aid. So that's this stuff right here. This is basically just surface tension reducer, and I think they're pretty much all about the same. But just squirted a little bit of aqua gloss in there straight out of the bottle, and added some water. Now I've already added some ink to these two, but let me put a drop of black ink in this other one so you can kind of see. I've been doing some experimenting with these Liquitex acrylic inks because I think these may be very similar, if not the same, as these new shaders from Ammo, and I've been wanting to kind of test them out. But you don't have to get the acrylic ink. You can just get the standard pigmented India ink. That works well too. And you'll notice that they kind of come in different types. Like this is transparent raw umber. This black is semi-opaque. And then this white, this is a titanium white. It's a fully opaque ink. And that will make a difference as to how much you have to put in your mix. But I think it's pretty intuitive that the more transparent it is, the more you may have to add to get it to be as dense as you want it. So I have found that it takes basically 1 drop of black in that mix right there for me to get what I want. And one nice thing about this wash is that because it's acrylic, it doesn't reactivate itself. And so what that means is that if you want to increase the density with subsequent applications, you can totally do that, unlike an enamel or an oil wash, which doesn't work quite as well. So here's what we've got going on. So it works really nicely on detail parts. Wheel wells, landing gear legs, cockpit walls, things like that have a lot of really crisp, molded in details, and that will really capture the material. It works best if you have a situation where you can keep it level for the entire time that it dries. It is very sensitive to gravity and tends to want to run downhill more than oil washes do, in my experience. So kind of have to keep that in mind. But again, if you don't get enough of it where you need, then you just wait and do it again. It dries pretty quickly, so it's not much of an issue. And we'll see here in a minute how this is going to look. And in the meantime, hang on, sorry about that. In the meantime, let me show you what I have going on with the with these wheel wells. What I'm trying to do in there is give them a kind of a dirty look, you know, just collecting, you know, filth, dust, mud, you know, just gunge that you would find in the wheel well of any vehicle. And that's where I mixed up these two brown mixes. And I've done the darker brown one because that's kind of what I feel like I need in the side that's white, and then a lighter brown one because I have to exaggerate it on the side that is that's black if I want it to show it all. So you can see that this is a little bit different than an oil wash. This does not really flow the same way that an oil wash does. I mean, it does, but not quite the same. And you can see what I mean about it really being sensitive to gravity. And because, you know, it's pooling already right down here in this low spot where the dimple is right there. And you can see that it doesn't just naturally just go everywhere all over the surface. So, sorry, I keep bumping into the camera. Anyway, so you just keep adding it, get it where you want it, and then let it dry and see how it looks. Now, one of the cool things is that if you get more than you want, you can kind of tune it while it's wet, because it will draw back up into a brush. And you can kind of see that if I take it all out of this brush by dabbing it on a little towel and then just stick it right in there. See, it just sucks it right up out of there. So you can kind of tune the look as you're going, you know, if you kind of see how, you know, how it's progressing. And I know that I want enough in there. So I'm just going to go ahead and add some back and we'll see. Now, you've probably noticed that I got a little bit on the outside here and that I don't want that, all right? So this is the beef that people have with acrylic washes, and I always have too. And I refused for the most part to ever use them because of the fact that they don't clean up the same way that an oil wash or an enamel wash does, which, as you know, comes right off with a little bit of mineral spirits. You know, once an acrylic cures, it's there, right? It's set, and you can't shift it and adjust it the way that you can with an oil wash. But I have kind of discovered a secret weapon for that, a workaround, and this was honestly kind of an accidental discovery, and it's this stuff that I've mentioned on several occasions, and this is not going to make you guys who live outside the United States happy, but it's this 409. All right, 409 is a household cleaner that was invented back in the 60s, and it's a really good degreaser, and I don't know what's in here, but for whatever reason it will remove or at least degrade some acrylic paints. I kind of accidentally discovered it when I had brush painted, done some work on the invasion stripes on my last Spitfire project, and I went to try to do some cleanup, and for some reason I decided to try to do or I think maybe I was degreasing it before I went to put a clear coat on top of them, And I use the 409 because it's a good degreaser, but it typically does not harm paint. It certainly doesn't have any effect on lacquer. Anyway, I saw when I was going over the part of the wing that had the invasion stripes on them, because I did that in Mission Models acrylic, that it was degrading it a little bit. And I was like, that's interesting. And so I've tinkered with it. It doesn't affect all acrylics the same. Like Stynylrez, for example, doesn't seem to do anything to it. But this acrylic wash, even days later, I have reliably proven this. I did it many times before I decided to say anything about it, because I didn't want to find out that I was, that it worked one day and not the next. All right, but even days later, okay. So I've got a little bit of the 409 on this Q-tip, and you can see, you saw when I got this little bit of excess here. That was just a few minutes ago, and see, look at that, just cleaned it right off of there. And it wouldn't have mattered if this was tomorrow or next week, still would have worked. I have tested that very explicitly. So it's a really good option, I think. And the reason why I like it is because you can kind of already see down in here where it gives a little bit more of a shadowed look than an oil wash does. Oil washes tend to have a kind of a hard edge, and that works really good in certain situations. But in other situations, it's nice to have a more gradual transition there that gives you a little bit more of a shadow look. And you can see that in there. And so it's just a look that I really prefer in certain situations. Now, it does have one other disadvantage, and that is because I'm using a clear gloss varnish, yeah, it's going to dry glossy. So you just have to be aware of that. It's not a big deal. I'm going to be putting a flat coat on all of this anyway, so that's not going to be a problem. But anyway, you can see kind of what's going on there. I'm getting a kind of a nice natural dirty look in there that I think is going to look good. Now the question is, am I going to be able to get a light enough wash to where it kind of looks equivalent over here on this other side? So we'll see how that comes out when I come back and take another look at it. Let's see in this few minutes how these gear legs look. So this wash is not bad. You can see I'm already getting just enough of a buildup to accentuate all of those molded in protrusions. And if I wanted it to be more dramatic, I could go back and add another dose to it, and I may just do that. But that's not bad. It's a really nice, subtle little shadow, and I really don't have to do anything else to it to get it, to get it in shape. In other words, it doesn't require all that tuning up that oil washes do so often. Now, I do not recommend it for panel lines. At least I don't think I do. I like the capillary action of an oil wash for panel lines, and this is just a little bit different. That doesn't mean it wouldn't work. I just haven't decided to try that yet. Okay, so this thing has made a little bit of progress. I finished doing the washes inside the wheel wells, and I'm pretty stoked about how that came out. I got my tones, I think, pretty balanced so that you can see the effect on both sides, and I like that look. The acrylic magic wash, if you want to call it that, has indeed proven to be magical. And then I unglossed everything, and what I'm using on this one is Mr. Color GX113. Now, I have long been a fan of Tester's Dull Coat. It's the OG ungloss, and it's great. Always reliable. I usually just mix it 50-50 with plain old hardware store lacquer thinner, and it does great. But it's not always super flat, and that's fine. I don't necessarily always want it to be super flat. But one thing that I've noticed is that with enough scrubbing And that is not a normal thing, but with enough scrubbing using mineral spirits, like let's say you have a mistake in your oil paint rendering, you might need to rub that off. I have found that you can rub through dull coat even when it's fully, no question about it, completely, days or weeks old, dry. But I learned in one of those situations where I needed to remove some clear. And I've also found that IPA will rub dull coat off. This stuff, hard as nails. Like it's even harder to sand than dull coat is. This stuff is just, it's like matte surface armor plate. So I decided I'd go ahead and use it. My first overall coating, I decided to reduce it about 2 to 1 with Mr. Leveling Thinner, just to see. And what you get when you thin that stuff with Mr. Leveling Thinner is you get a kind of an eggshell. It's not super flat, which may be what you want. And in a couple places, I needed to make sure it was dead flat for reasons that will be apparent here momentarily. And so then I went back in those localized areas. I shot some that I had just mixed with just cheap lacquer thinner. And you can see that my selective sanding and chipping has all kind of come together. You don't see those sanding marks around there. That's the look that I was going for with little tiny chips. Okay, you're going to see another thing over here if you're sharp-eyed, and here. You'll notice that I've got some dark stains around. Tough to see there. That's confusing for the camera. Dark stains around those panels and all those fasteners. So what happened there? Well, that was an effect that I knew I was going to want to do, and I was going to do it using oils. But I had a little bit of a conundrum, conflict, whatever you want to call it, because I have more work to do on these removable panels, and I did not want to create a conflict between this staining and the streaking that I'm going to do, which basically I like to call it breech snot. A lot of people don't realize that most of the gunk that comes out of these machine guns comes out of the breeches and then gets sucked out of the ejection chutes. And I knew that I was going to want to apply those streaks, and I did not want that to interfere with creating the stains of busy, greasy hands that I was going to put around all these fasteners. So I went ahead and blended a little bit of Winsor & Newton raw umber and ivory black to make a little bit of that, and did some OPR, oil paint rendering, around all those areas. And what I did is I basically just applied it with a straight density with a very small brush and blended it with that quite a bit. And some people ask me if I leached the oils out first on cardboard, and that is kind of the standard thing. But I find that it's not always necessary or desirable. The oils will stiffen up a lot when you leach the linseed oil out of them, and I wanted it to go on smooth and easy, so I did not do that in this case. What I did then to blend those and make them really, kind of have that soft and subtle look, I used this. This is my secret weapon for blending. It's enormous, but it's just magic. I can't explain it. I could have practically erased those completely with this brush. This allows me, as huge as it is, to really tune those in to get that nice subtle level of staining there. So, and I did that directly on the white paint. I normally will not try to do any oil work directly on MRP because it's just too shiny. That level of sheen is just too much for oil work. You will end up just wanting to throw yourself out a window because you'll just be chasing it around. It will not stay put. Oils need a little bit of tooth to get some traction so that you can effectively work them into the surface the way you want to. But for whatever reason, this MRP white is really flat, and so it was fine. So I did not have to lay down any dull coat to give me the surface that I needed for that. I just went ahead and did the OPR, and then after, I mean, it really didn't need a full day probably, but the next day, which was today, I went ahead and then laid my flat coat on top of all of that. And so now I'm ready to do the next 3 things that I want to do here. And those things are, I want to do the aforementioned streaks of breech snot. I want to put some filth trailing out from behind the wheel wells, you know, from the tires, and and some along the center line. And I want to do the characteristic streaking that Spitfires tended to have down the center line of the fuselage. So first things first is going to be these little streaks right here. Now, I had mentioned that I was doing some experimentation with these inks. And this specific task is the reason that I got these Liquitex inks. Because I've wanted something for a long time that enabled me to sneak up on stains like exhaust stains, powder burns, dust, anything like that. But that gave you a get out of jail free card by making it where you could remove it. You can do that with enamels, but I tend not to like to use enamels as paint because you can run into problems later with other enamel weathering products. I have done plenty of exhaust stains with very, very thin MRP, and that works great. But it's pretty permanent. I mean, and I have in extremis, I have erased some mistakes using mineral spirits because it'll do it. And if you've got a really thick layer of MRP on top of a regular dense layer of MRP, then you can wash it off with mineral spirits without doing much, if any, damage to whatever's underneath. But again, still risky. Wanted to try something easier, and I had read that these acrylic inks could be removed, like with water. So I thought, well, why not try that? So here's what happens. All right, so this is about 2.5 cc's of IPA. And to that, I'm going to add 1 drop of this Liquitex acrylic carbon black. And I'm going to show you what we can do with that. It's pretty cool. All right. So that's the mixture. And I've been doing some practicing on this little paint mule. Just spilled one of my washes. I really, really hate having such a cramped workspace. Very few things frustrate me more than not having enough room to work. Not having enough room and not having enough light. I don't have a problem with light, but I do have a problem with having enough room. Yeah, that's my wash. Acrylic wash. I guess I don't really need much of it anymore since I got my wheel wells all done, but still. Just annoying. Anyhow, okay. So, this is my little paint mule. And I have been doing some streaking. You can see there's some powder burns, and there is a nice Mustang characteristic exhaust streak. And those were all airbrushed on there using my Sotar, which has a 0.2 millimeter needle. it's wonderful. But here's the magic, okay? This is my little thing of 409, and I'm gonna just take and find a dry spot on this rag now. Put a little bit of 409 on there, and this is just like where I was showing you guys where I cleaned up the wash that I was putting in the wheel wells yesterday. All right, you see that exhaust or gun streak right there, and this was like 2 days ago that I airbrushed that on there. Yep, just like that. Adios, and absolutely no impact on the paint below. Now, what is this other thing that's going on here? Okay, this stuff over here is where I was experimenting. I thought, let's see what happens when I mix some of this ink with some Mr. Rapid thinner. And so I was tinkering around with that, seeing how small I could spray and what the effect was, and it was pretty cool. But it definitely does not come off with 409. I mean, like, I can scrub, and it will not come off. But what I did find is that, again, going back to removing really thin layers of lacquer with mineral spirits, yep, you can see where I scrubbed most, if not all of that. And I was using a dirty Q-tip that I had just stuck in some mineral spirits. I was able to clean that off. So, kind of an interesting result. And it might be useful because the thing that I have also found is that with this acrylic ink on here, I could screw that up by touching it too much with my finger. If I just touch it, no big deal. But if I grab it and hold it, or if I smudge my finger's a little bit sweaty or whatever, it is going to screw it up. In fact, you can see a fingerprint has already happened. Maybe you can see it somewhere right in there. So if you're going to use these inks, you have to be prepared to either never touch the area again, or you have to pretty quickly seal it in with a top coat, which is what I'm going to do on this. But I'm going to go ahead and I am confident enough that I can't screw this up, that I am going to attempt anyway to spray these streaks right here on camera. Probably a terrible idea, but I think I can do it. I want to warm up a little bit on the paint mule. Now I'm doing this at really low pressure. Like, I'm doing this at about 10 psi, and I could go even lower. But I'm going to practice for a second, and then I'll come back and actually try and do it live. Okay, so there we go. I just did those, and I haven't lost my touch since a couple of days ago, I think. So let's just go for it. All right. Here we go. Let's try one. Not too bad. I may look at that and decide later that I don't like it, and that's not a big deal because I can remove it. So there we go. Not too bad. Not too bad. See how I was able to just kind of sneak up on that and work it without getting any spidering or any, just having nothing crazy going on. I'm pretty stoked with this process. I'm going to do the same thing up here on these machine guns, but I'm going to wait till I've got the top side dull coated as well, and where I can kind of handle it all at once. So, but anyway, I think that's good. I need to do the same thing over here on this side. Okay, so I decided that I did not like this first one that I did, and that I am going to redo it. So I cleaned it off with the 409, and I'm going to respray it. There we go. Little straighter. I'm happier. You guys may have noticed that I misfired and got a little bit of a blotch right here, and I don't really want any in front of the ejector port. So got a little bit of 409 here, and just gonna very carefully come back and clean in front of that. Okay, next is going to be some kind of dirty, dusty discoloration around the parts of the wing and the fuselage that get that from the wheels and the propeller wash and all that. So I've mixed up a brownish light tone that should match what's in the wheel wells already, and it's pretty subtle. It's going to be maybe not even possible to see it on camera, I don't know, but it's there, and I'm just discoloring all of this area in here. I don't even know if this will show up on the black, but maybe you can see that. I don't know. These really, really light colors are difficult for the digital camera, but it's there and it's going to look good, I think. Okay, I got it to show up on the black, but I had to put quite a bit on there, but look at how nice and subtle that is. I can get it a little bit heavier up towards the front, right there by where the actual tire is. By using the airflow in the natural direction, it shows up not at all behind that radiator because it wouldn't collect there. A little bit in the middle just to kind of discolor things a little bit, and got a little bit of discoloration over here on the black part. So again, I'm stoked with this. I think this is a neat tool to add to my arsenal of effects. Okay, so as you can see, I continued to work it, and I'm pretty stoked. I worked it all the way back to the tail. You can see a subtle discoloration. I came back with a thicker blend of ink and cranked down my MAC valve on my airbrush and got a little bit of some splattering going on. It's pretty subtle. You may not be able to really see it there, but I think that's good. Got all those pieces in that add into the middle there to match up pretty well. And I did the gear covers as well. Can't forget those. So I have to say I feel pretty stoked about this. Again, I'm not going to lock this in with dull coat until later today or maybe even tomorrow, because I want to look at it, make sure I feel good about it, show it to some other guys, see what the feedback is before I am totally committed to it. But I think I feel pretty good about this. All right, time for the third thing, which are the oil streaks here in the fuselage. But first, you can see that I've added a little bit more to the filth. I've done some splattering. You should be able to see that. Ran it all the way down the length of the fuselage and got a lot on the underside of the horizontal stabilizers. I did that using my MAC valve. It's something that I've talked about in other videos. For those of you that aren't familiar, this is a MAC valve right there on my airbrush hose. Now, a lot of airbrushes have one right underneath the head. And there's, misconception out there about what it does. Some people think that this is another way to regulate pressure. It's not. It is nothing more than a flow rate regulator. And it's not even really a regulator at all because it has no spring in it. It is simply a gate that lets you control the flow rate. And when you crank it way down, you can get a splattering effect like this. It also works really good with things like enamel washes and pigment fixer. It's something that I definitely would encourage everybody to experiment with because it opens up another tool in your arsenal of weathering things. But the main thing right now is these oil streaks. So how to do that? First, let me talk for a second about what was going on there. And I'm trying to find the color sheet, which, there it is. Okay. So, Spitfires had often, you can see this in reference photos, a very characteristic type of streaking on the bottom. And my understanding, my theory, is that what happened is that that you'd get oil collecting inside the engine cowling, because it's got oil tanks on the firewall, which is right here by this panel line, and see where that runs, where that intersects with the belly of the aircraft. It's around where all of these panels install. So Tamiya has helped us a lot with this. And so what you get is streaks that start very specifically along this panel line, and you also get some that come, in around this whole joint, basically. And what happens, and you'll see, I'm kind of a 6 of one, half a dozen of the other mind on this. It's not totally clear when you look at reference photos whether or not this is a series of short streaks that are just kind of longer in the middle, like this, because they do definitely tend to extend way back on the fuselage, or if they are streaks that are shaped by the airflow, because on a Mark 9 in particular, you've got 2 large coolers rather than one large one and then the small one. And the airflow is going to get squeezed in that channel between the 2 coolers. And so what you might also have is some of this type of thing going on, where the streaks actually bend and collect in the middle. I think either way is probably fine. It's, that's a subtlety that a lot of people are just not going to notice or appreciate. As long as we get the sort of characteristic shape that is this real long, skinny triangle. And the thing about doing curved streaks is that ups the difficulty level by an order of magnitude. Because, in my view, streaks have to be perfect. They can't be wiggly or crooked or unparalleled or whatever, because they're shaped by natural forces that all go in the same direction, like gravity, for example, airflow. That's why I was really trying hard to make sure that these powder streaks were very straight and parallel, because they're going to be. All of that airflow, at 300 miles an hour is all going in the same direction, and it's going to carry all those particles uniformly along that surface. So the question is, because it's relatively easy when your streaks are super short to get them all, correct. But when you've got them long like this, it becomes more difficult, and especially if they're going to have a curved shape. So how do we do that? I will tell you right now that I am just like the New England Patriots. Not at all above cheating. Sorry, Matt Bull. Had to throw a little Patriots joke in there for you. And I will not hesitate to mask a streak or use a guide of some kind if I feel like that's what I need in order to make it look right. And on my last Spitfire project, I used a ruler, basically. So let me see. I didn't literally use a ruler. I used a piece of wood or something, where basically I had a guide that I was able to use to drag my brush along. Basically like that. So that's probably what I'm going to do here. I just have to figure out how I'm going to get set up for it. So we'll come back in a minute after I know how I'm going to proceed. Okay, so here's what I've set up. I'm taking advantage of my Masterpiece Models fixture and kind of offset the thing to the right a little bit. And you can see, so I'm just off the center line, and I've mixed up some black, some ivory black, and some raw umber Winsor and Newton oils. And we're going to give this a go. And here's the thing. If this does not work the way that I want it to, not a big deal, because it's oils. This all has GX113 on it. So if I need to just scrub this off of there, because I don't like the way it looks, not a big deal. So I've put the brush in some thinners because I think I want this paint to have a little bit of, not really flow to it, but I want it to go down soft and easy. So just going to hold my guide there in place and just gradually remove the brush as I go. So that gets me a nice straight base to start with. And what I feel like I need to do is just kind of keep working that. I thought this piece of tape would help me, but now I think it's just going to get in my way. So I'm going to get rid of that. And just kind of keep working on this. Okay, so now I've built what I feel like is the beginning of a pattern that I think can work. And you can see a little bit of glare there, but I've got a lot of oils concentrated up towards the front, because what I'm going to do now is start pulling these streaks back and kind of, giving them a more streaky look. Obviously what you want with streaks is for them to be heavier at the front and to tail away at the back. So what I'm going to do now is I've got this brush. Okay, this is called a wisp, and this thing is a super cool brush. You can see that it's got these separated bristles, and this thing is great for streaking. I've got a whole set of them that come in about 4 different sizes, and they're not very expensive. So what I'll do now is get a little bit of mineral spirits on it. Well, maybe not. Let's try it dry first and see how that works. Now, it was not quite as important before that I get everything running straight, but now it definitely is, because I'm going to start introducing lines or texture, whatever you want to call it, that really give these streaks more of an authentic look. This is definitely a one-armed wallpaper hanger kind of an affair. Okay, so I've got a couple of things I need to fix already. You can see that I've got some little tails back here at the back that are not going to work. And I've got a section right here that not only goes crooked but is thicker and denser than stuff that's in that's right in front of it. So I'm going to tune that up a little bit, because you're not really going to... There's some things that you just have to recognize that you're not really going to improve by continuing to mess with it. So I'm just going to try and shape that a little bit, and now we'll see how that does. And I think I do need a little bit of mineral spirits in this wisp. I think that's going to work better, because what that'll do is cut through the oil enough to introduce the lines that I'm looking for, that kind of define the pattern. Okay, so you can see what happens when you get a little too much thinner. It starts to wash it, and you start to lose the definition. And the definition of the shapes is really important. I also seem to have a bad habit of twisting the brush at the end and getting these little crooked tails, and I definitely do not want that. So I'm going to clean those off. Okay, so I'm starting to get there. I feel like it's shaping up. I'm not too worried about what happens over here in the black part, because that's not going to be, real well defined for obvious reasons. But you can see I'm starting to get it where it's got a little bit more of an authentic look. But there are little places there, like see where I've got a wider area right here. Well, that doesn't show up well on camera at all, does it? All this black and white is really confusing my poor little digital camera. Anyway, I've got an area of right here where it doesn't make sense, because it's gotten too wide behind the exit point. Okay, see what I mean right here? And that's subtle, but those are the little things that your brain is computing when it's looking at something like this. So I'm going to work on that and make it make a little bit more sense. So let me see now how that does. The thing that I hope you recognize from watching this is that oils are extremely sensitive to tools and techniques. See, even my cat knows that. So it really can change dramatically with how much pressure you're using, how much thinner you've got in your brush, the type of brush. Every little thing is going to affect the outcome. And you kind of have to be willing to let it look terrible along the way, and just keep working it. And if it gets to the point where you just keep working it and it just never gets any better, then don't hesitate to just stop, erase it, take a breath, and start over, because that's the magic of working with oils. All right, so now I'm at a point where I believe it's a good idea to stop, take a breath, and just have a good look at it. And one of my most important steps with stuff like this is to post it on SMCG and let other guys look at it, because streaks are not easy. They're actually, in my opinion, one of the most difficult things in painting to get right. And it's real easy to get yourself stuck into the process and not really see what you've got going on, step away because you've done a lot of hard work and feel like it looks pretty good. And then you show it to other people and they're like, whoa, wait a minute, that just doesn't look quite right. So that's what I'm going to do next. I'm going to tinker with this a little bit more, then I'm going to post it up, see what those dudes think, and then we'll come back later. Okay, so I think this is something that I can be happy with. I didn't get any major outrage on SMCG, so that tells me a lot. I've showed it to several other people. You can see I've toned it, tweaked the shapes a little bit. I came back, it was a little bit dense and I was losing some of the black and white separation line there in the middle of the wing. So I came back and just very lightly toned it back with this magic tool, and feel like right now I feel good about it. I feel like this is not too bad. I'm gonna go with it, which means that I'm going to let this sit here until tomorrow. This will probably take a good at least 24 hours to be fully cured, maybe longer. Some colors with oils take longer than others, and you just have to be patient. We'll see. But what I do to be confident that the oils have cured is I leave my little dish out here on the bench, and I just keep checking it because I know that if it's cured, then this is too. So there it is, and I think that's probably about all the time I have for this episode. And that's a good breaking point, because with the next episode, we're going to flip it over and work on the top side. Okay, so there you go. I know that was another long one, but hopefully you find that useful. I really wanted to try and show, some of the actual process. And as you can see, it takes a while. That's just the way it is. And what I hope you see even more importantly is that sometimes it's an iterative process. Like with these oils, you just got to be willing to accept that it may not look right the first time, and that's okay, because you can always erase it and start over as many times as you need to. So I know sometimes guys get intimidated by some of these effects, but you really don't have to be, because they are, when you do it right, relatively low penalty. So at any rate, I hope that you enjoyed that and found it useful, and that you'll stay tuned for the next episode when we get into some exhaust staining. As always, much love.